In seventh grade, my class took an end-of-the-year field trip to an aquarium near our school. It was called Blue Water Aquarium, nestled in the rolling hills of a small town in the mountains of Northern California. Our science teacher, Mr. Ramirez, was our chaperone for the trip. He was a laid-back teacher, and while that usually made him popular among the students, it also meant he wasn't the most vigilant when it came to supervising us. Because of Mr. Ramirez's relaxed attitude, my friend Ethan and I managed to slip away from the main group once we arrived at the aquarium. We weren't interested in waiting around for everyone else. We wanted to explore on our own. The aquarium was practically empty except for our classes, so when Ethan and I wandered through the dimly lit passageways, it felt like we had the entire place to ourselves. We marveled at the massive tanks filled with exotic marine life, the soft blue glow of the water casting eerie shadows on the walls. We made jokes about the fish we recognized from movies and TV shows, our laughter echoing in the empty corridors. But then something happened that wiped the smiles off our faces. As we moved on to another darkened room filled with even more enormous tanks, we heard a voice behind us, sharp and commanding. "Hey, you two!" We turned to see a man standing there, wearing cargo shorts and a green shirt. He was older, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, with a serious expression that immediately made us feel uneasy. "Are you at the field trip?" he asked. I was about to deny it, but Ethan quickly nodded and said yes. The man gestured for us to follow him, and assuming he worked for the aquarium, we obediently trailed behind. But instead of leading us back to the main lobby, the man took us down a series of narrow, poorly lit hallways. We passed by the restrooms and a few exit signs, and I started to get a bad feeling about where we were going. Finally, I asked if he worked at the aquarium and where he was taking us. He responded that he did work there and that he needed to drive us around to the front of the aquarium to let us back in. Even as seventh graders, this explanation didn't make much sense to us, but we were too scared to argue. When he led us outside to a small parking lot near the woods, my stomach twisted with fear. But we were more afraid of getting in trouble, so when he opened the door to this car, we reluctantly got in the back seat. As soon as we were inside, he locked the doors and started driving. Ethan and I exchanged nervous glances, and when the man made a left turn instead of a right, we both asked where he was taking us. He ignored our questions, and a few seconds later, we heard the click of the door locks. Then, with a chilling calmness, he said, "If either of you tries anything, I'll kill you." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a large knife, holding it up as a clear threat. Fear gripped us, and we sat in stunned silence as he drove us deeper into the woods. The car wound through a desolate, tree-lined road, the thick canopy above blocking out what little daylight remained. The man eventually pulled over to the side of the road in a place that looked completely isolated. No houses, no traffic, just endless woods. He got out of the car, still holding the knife, and told me to step out. As I did, he leaned in and told Ethan that if he wanted to see me alive again, he had better stay in the car until the man returned. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as he began to lead me into the woods, the knife now hidden but still very much a threat. But as he walked me towards the tree line, I saw Ethan moving inside the car, sliding over to my side where the door was unlocked. I didn't wait. I screamed, "Run!" and we both took off down the hill as fast as we could. The man shouted something unintelligible behind us and gave chase, but he was slower than we were. In a last-ditch effort to stop us, he threw the knife at me. It whizzed past, missing me by inches, before clattering to the ground. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running, my legs burning as we raced back towards the direction we had come from. Miraculously, we made it back to the aquarium, out of breath and shaken, but otherwise unharmed. We managed to slip back into the group unnoticed, and to our relief, Mr. Ramirez didn't even realize we had been gone. Ethan and I decided not to tell anyone about what had happened. We figured no one would believe us, and besides, what good would it do? The man had likely fled, and there was little chance he'd ever be caught. As we grew older, we often wondered about the man's intentions. We could easily guess at some of them, but we tried not to dwell on it. Even now, it's not something we like to talk about. The memory of that day is still too vivid, too terrifying. a reminder of how close we came to something truly horrific. When I was in 8th grade, the highlight of the school year was our class trip to Washington, D.C. It was a chance to travel with friends, see new places, and experience a bit of freedom away from our parents. After weeks of planning and anticipation, the day finally arrived, and we boarded the buses that would take us on our adventure. Once we reached D.C., our class of about 100 students was divided into 3 groups, each with its own itinerary. We visited all the usual attractions, museums, monuments, historical sites. But one night, our teachers decided to add a bit of excitement to the trip. A colonial ghost tour. It was supposed to be a fun, spooky way to end our stay, and I remember feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension as we set off on the tour. The tour took us through a small, historical town not far from the city. The guide led us down narrow, cobblestone streets, past old houses and cemeteries, all while sharing stories of the town's haunted past. We were split into smaller groups, each with about 10 students, and given the option to take photos in case we caught any paranormal activity on camera. As we walked from one site to the next, I was more interested in the historical stories than in the possibility of seeing the ghost. My friend, Lily, who I was sharing a room with during the trip, was the same way. She wasn't one of the kids constantly snapping pictures, but she would occasionally take a photo if something caught her eye. One of the stops on the tour was a small 2-story house that stood alone in the middle of the street. The house had an eerie blue-tinted glow to its windows, but it was clearly vacant. I was intrigued by the house and listened closely as the guide began to tell its story. The house, she explained, had once belonged to a man and his wife. They were a happy couple, and when they learned they were expecting a child, their joy was complete. But tragedy struck when the wife died shortly after giving birth to their daughter. The man was devastated by his loss, and his grief turned to bitterness. He blamed his daughter for his wife's death and treated her with cruelty and disdain. The girl grew up in that house, isolated and unloved. Her father kept her hidden away, ashamed of her plain looks and convinced that no one would ever want to marry her. She spent most of her days in an upstairs room, sewing and weaving, the only skills her father believed she was good for. As I listened to the guide's story, I felt a deep sadness for the girl who had lived such a lonely, miserable life. When the guide finished speaking, Lily took a quick photo of the house, and we moved on with the group. We continued walking through the town, visiting other old homes and graveyards, but I couldn't shake the feeling of sorrow that the story of the girl and her father had left with me. It wasn't until later, when Lily and I were looking through the photos she had taken, that we realized just how eerie that house truly was. In the photo of the house, there was a faint gleam of light in one of the second-floor windows. Curious, we zoomed in to get a better look. What we saw made our blood run cold. There, in the window, were 3 distinct figures. The first was a woman, her outline faint but unmistakable. Standing behind her was a taller man, his figure slightly more defined. But it was the third figure that caught our attention. A shadowy, almost indistinct shape that seemed to be standing just to the side of the man and woman. Lily and I stared at the image in shock, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The first 2 figures made sense. It was easy to imagine that they were the spirits of the man and his daughter. But who was the third figure, the one that was so much harder to see? Unable to contain our curiosity, I raised my hand and asked the guide if there had been anyone else living in the house with the family. The guide seemed surprised by my question and paused before answering. Yes, she said slowly. During the time that family lived there, they had a servant, a woman who helped take care of the house. Lily and I exchanged a look of disbelief. Could that third figure have been the spirit of the servant? The guide didn't offer any further explanation, and we didn't ask any more questions. But from that moment on, the ghost tour took on a new level of intensity for us. The photograph, with its 3 ghostly figures, was something we would never forget. Senior year of high school, my forensics teacher, Mr. Thompson, convinced the school to let him take our class on a field trip to a site that had once been the location of a notorious crime scene. The building, which sat abandoned in the middle of a dense forest, was rumored to have been a drug den in its heyday. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie, and yet there we were, about to explore it for educational purposes. When we arrived, I was struck by how isolated the building was. The only road that led to it was overgrown with weeds, and the surrounding forest seemed to close in around us as we made our way to the site. The building itself was massive, with multiple floors that loomed over us, casting long shadows on the ground. Mr. Thompson led us inside, his voice echoing through the empty halls as he gave us a tour. He knew a surprising amount about the building's history, explaining that its original purpose was unknown and that construction on the higher floors had never been completed. Over time, the building had become a hotspot for illegal activities, including drug deals. As we explored the lower floors, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my stomach. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the floor was littered with debris. It was clear that the building had been abandoned for a long time, but it still felt like there was something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. Despite Mr. Thompson's warnings to stay with the group, a few of my classmates decided to wander off and explore on their own. My friend Olivia and I were among them. We were both curious about the upper floors, especially since they were supposed to be unfinished. We climbed the stairs, one creaky step after another, until we reached the higher levels. The higher we went, the worse the condition of the building became. The wood beneath our feet was rotting, and there were gaping holes in the floor that made every step a potential hazard. When we reached what we thought was the top floor, we realized there was one more level above us. But the stairs that led to it were completely destroyed, leaving us with no way to reach the top. That's when Olivia spotted something, a small hole in the ceiling, just big enough for someone to squeeze through. As we stood there, trying to decide if we should try to find another way up, Olivia suddenly grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked up at the hole in the ceiling, just in time to see an arm, pale and thin, reach down through the opening. The arm was covered in a long black sleeve, and it seemed to be waving at us, as if beckoning us to come closer. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Hey," I called up to the person, trying to keep my voice steady. "How do we get up there?" There was no response, just the sound of a ticking noise, like someone was clicking their tongue. The arm continued to wave, almost insistently, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. Olivia tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. "Let's go back down," she urged. I nodded, my own sense of unease growing by the second. Just as we turned to leave, we heard a loud crash behind us. Spinning around, we saw a man standing on the far side of the room, his back to us. He was dressed in tattered clothes, his posture hunched and tense. For a moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he turned his head to look at us. His face was gone, his eyes hollow and dark. There was something about him that sent a jolt of fear straight through me. He didn't look like someone who was just exploring an abandoned building. He looked dangerous. Without a word, Olivia and I bolted for the stairs. We ran down flight after flight, our footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Every few floors, I glanced back, half expecting to see the man following us. But each time, there was nothing. Finally, we reached the ground floor, gasping for breath. We found Mr. Thompson with the rest of the class, and we quickly told him what had happened. He seemed concerned, but also a little skeptical. Nevertheless, he decided it was best to cut the trip short and head back to the bus. As we left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. The man in the building, the strange arm reaching through the ceiling, none of it made sense. But whatever it was, it had left Olivia and me both shaken. The rest of the class learned valuable lessons about forensics that day, but for Olivia and me, the trip was more about survival than education. It was an experience neither of us would ever forget, and one that left us questioning just how close we had come to real danger. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic, and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads.